The fire in my furnace burned hot, the heat licking at my face as I turned the glowing glass in my hands. I should have felt at peace here, in my studio, in the one place where everything made sense, where I could control the chaos, mold it into something beautiful. But tonight, something was off. That uneasy feeling had been gnawing at me for weeks now, an instinct, a whisper in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite silence. I had ignored it, brushed it aside as stress, exhaustion, overthinking. Until now. Until I heard my wife's voice from the other room. At first, it was just a murmur, soft and distant. But then the words became clear. I can't wait to see you again. The glass rod in my hand slipped slightly, but I caught it before it could fall. My breath stilled. My fingers clenched tighter around the tool. Yeah, I know. We have to be careful. He doesn't suspect a thing. The world around me dimmed. The roaring fire. The rhythmic hum of the furnace. The familiar comfort of my studio. It all faded, replaced by the cold, sharp edge of realization sinking into my chest like a blade. She's talking to someone else. I stood frozen, every muscle in my body locked in place. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was talking to a friend, joking about something harmless. But then she said his name, Julian. And just like that, my world cracked. Julian Mercer. A name I knew too well. A name whispered in elite art circles. A powerful, cunning collector who prided himself on getting what he wanted. A man with a reputation for breaking artists, manipulating them, using them. A man who had somehow wormed his way into my marriage. The realization slammed into me so hard, I had to grip the edge of my work table to stay upright. My heart pounded against my ribs. My breath came too fast, and for a brief second, I thought I might be sick. No, this couldn't be happening. Not her. Not us. I had to be wrong. I had to know. Moving like a man in a trance, I set my tools down and stepped silently toward the studio door, peering through the small gap. Celeste was curled up on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, twirling a strand of her dark hair the way she used to when she spoke to me in the early days of our marriage. But she wasn't talking to me. Her voice was soft, low, intimate in a way that made my stomach churn. I know. I miss you too. A light laugh. I love that you're thinking about me. It's dangerous, but I like it. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Every word felt like a slap. But it wasn't just the affair. No, that would have been almost normal. People cheated. Marriages fell apart. But this was something else. I turned away and crossed the room in 2 quick strides, grabbing the tablet we shared. My fingers hesitated over the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. But then I unlocked it, and my world shattered. There it was. Message after message. Late-night confessions, stolen moments, carefully orchestrated plans. Julian, that last piece was exquisite. The collectors are already circling. Celeste, I told you. He doesn't ask questions. He just creates. I'll make sure you get the next one soon. Julian, good. Once the series is complete, we'll be unstoppable. I exhaled sharply, the weight of their words pressing against my chest, suffocating me. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was using me. Using my hands, my talent, my name, to build a future with another man. And I had been blind to it. My fingers trembled as I set the tablet down. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to storm into that room, throw it in her face, demand to know how long she'd been betraying me. But another part, the colder, sharper part of me, held back. No, she wanted to lie, to manipulate me, to treat me like some naive fool. Fine, let her think I was still blind. Let her believe she was safe. Because now, I was watching her too. And she was about to learn just how dangerous it was to betray a man who knew how to shape fire into something deadly. This wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Her, whispering sweet nothings into the phone. Him, reading my messages, laughing behind my back, playing me like a fool. The words on that screen kept flashing in my mind, like a goddamn neon sign. He doesn't ask questions. He just creates. I was a pawn, a tool, nothing more than a pair of hands to shape the glass while they pulled the strings. The rage inside me simmered like molten fire, but I forced myself to stay calm. No confrontations. Not yet. Not until I had everything. Celeste had no idea I knew. And that was my advantage. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. I waited for her to leave before making my next move. She kissed me on the cheek that morning, her lips soft against my skin, and I had to fight the overwhelming urge to recoil. "Busy day?" she asked, smiling like nothing was wrong. I forced a tired sigh, rubbing my temples. "Yeah. Trying to finish the commission for that client." She perked up at that. "Oh? Which one?" I met her gaze, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign that she knew I knew. But she was good. Too good. Her expression was nothing but mild curiosity. "Some private collector. Name's Vaughn." I lied smoothly, throwing a fake name into the mix just to see if it would trigger anything. Nothing. Not even a blink. She just nodded. "Well, don't overwork yourself, okay?" And then she was gone, off to do whatever the hell she actually did during the day. The second the door closed behind her, I got to work. I installed the camera in less than 10 minutes. Small. Almost invisible. Positioned in the perfect corner of my studio, angled just enough to capture the entire space, including where Celeste always made her calls. She thought she was clever. Thought she was untouchable. Let's see how well she covered her tracks when she didn't know someone was watching. By the time night fell, I had already called Nathan. Nathan Cross had been my best friend for years. We met in college, back when he was still hellbent on becoming a journalist. He had a sharp mind, a talent for digging into places he shouldn't, and a moral compass that only bent when absolutely necessary. He owed me a favor, and I was about to cash in. "I need you to look into someone for me," I said when he picked up. A pause. Then, "You sound like shit." I let out a dry laugh. "Thanks. What's going on?" I hesitated. Nathan knew Celeste. He knew us. He was there when I proposed. He was at our wedding. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. "She's cheating." Silence. Then, softly, "Damn." I rubbed a hand down my face, exhaustion creeping in. "Yeah, but that's not even the worst part." Another pause. "Tell me." So I did. Everything. By the time I finished, Nathan let out a long, low whistle. "That's some next-level betrayal, man." "No kidding. So what do you want me to do?" "I need dirt on Julian Mercer." "Anything. The deeper, the better." Nathan let out a humorless chuckle. "You really want to go up against this guy?" "He already went up against me," I said darkly. "I just didn't know it until now." Another pause. Then, finally, "All right. Give me a few days." I exhaled slowly, the weight of the conversation settling over me. "Thanks, man." Nathan hesitated. "Adrian, you sure you want to play this game?" I looked down at my hands that had spent years creating, shaping, giving life to something fragile and beautiful. And now, those same hands were going to tear it all apart. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm sure." The next few days were torture. I went through the motions, keeping my face neutral, my voice steady. I worked in the studio, let Celeste kiss me when she came home, pretended not to notice when she stepped outside for a business call. But inside, I was unraveling. And then, on the fourth day, the camera caught it. I watched the footage late that night, sitting in the dark of my studio, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. Celeste was on the phone. She sat at my work table, my space, where I had spent years pouring my soul into my craft. And she spoke to him. "So, everything's set?" Julian's smooth voice came through the speaker. Celeste smiled. "Yeah, he's almost finished with the new pieces. They'll be ready for transport soon." My stomach twisted. "Good," Julian said. "You know how important this deal is. Our buyer is expecting the collection to be exclusive. No surprises." "Don't worry," she purred. "Adrian doesn't suspect a thing." I clenched my jaw so tightly it ached. Julian chuckled. "That's why I love you, Celeste. You're ruthless." Something in her expression shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Doubt. Regret. But it was gone in an instant. "I do what I have to," she said. And then she hung up. I sat there, staring at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about me anymore. Julian wasn't just stealing my work. He was stealing my name, my reputation. He was using Celeste to funnel my art into his collection, making sure that once I finally caught on, it would be too late. My pieces would already be sold, rebranded, and I would be left with nothing. I inhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. But then, my phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. "Nathan, got something. You're gonna want to see this." I stared at the words, something dark and electric sparking in my chest. This was it. The game had begun, and I wasn't about to lose. Nathan didn't say anything when I slid into the booth across from him. He just watched me, his fingers tapping lightly against the side of his whiskey glass, waiting. I didn't speak either. Not right away. I just sat there, staring at the drink in front of me, trying to piece together the right words. How the hell was I supposed to say it out loud? Eventually, Nathan sighed and leaned forward. You look like shit. A humorless laugh escaped me. Feel like shit too. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. What happened? I didn't answer. Not at first. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small USB drive, setting it on the table between us. Nathan glanced at it, then back at me. What's this? Proof. My voice sounded distant, like it didn't belong to me. Of everything. He hesitated, then picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Everything is in. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Celeste. Julian. The whole goddamn setup. Nathan's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. He had known something was off from the moment I called him. He just hadn't known how bad it was. Until now. He didn't press me. He just pulled out his laptop, plugged in the USB, and started scrolling. His face remained unreadable as he went through the files. Messages. Bank transfers. Audio recordings from the hidden camera in my studio. But then he froze. What the hell is this? His voice had dropped, dangerously low. I knew exactly what he was looking at. A file labeled Adrian Wells, Final Strategy. I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down my face. It's how they were planning to destroy me. Nathan's eyes flicked up to meet mine. For the first time in years, I saw something like fear in them. This isn't just about stealing your art. His voice was quiet, but firm. They were gonna ruin you. Completely. I nodded. Yeah. A beat of silence passed between us. Then, without another word, Nathan shut the laptop and pushed it aside. So what's the plan? I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of stepping into that house, of seeing her face, pretending like nothing was wrong, it made my skin crawl. So instead, I drove. I had no destination, no purpose. Just miles of empty roads and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. At some point, I found myself parked outside an old diner. The kind that never closed, with flickering neon signs and a waitress who looked like she had been there since the beginning of time. I ordered coffee. Didn't drink it. Just sat there, staring at the steam curling from the cup, my mind running in circles. How had I let it get this far? I had always prided myself on seeing people for who they really were. I thought I understood the world, understood her. But I had been blind. She had smiled at me, kissed me, shared a bed with me, all while helping another man dismantle my life piece by piece. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. And yet, beneath the pain, beneath the fury, there was something else. Clarity. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I made the call. It rang twice before a voice answered. Low. Guarded. Who is this? I took a breath. My name is Adrian Wells. I need to talk to you about your husband. A pause. Then, carefully, you have 2 minutes. I didn't waste time. Julian Mercer is using my wife to funnel stolen art into his collection. My voice was steady, even as my heart pounded. And I think you already know that. Silence. Then, finally, a quiet sigh. And why exactly are you telling me this? I hesitated. I had expected anger. Maybe even denial. But what I hadn't expected was exhaustion. Like she was tired of it all. I think we have a common enemy, I said. And I think you want to see him fall just as much as I do. A longer pause. Then, a soft chuckle, bitter, devoid of humor. Well, Margot Sinclair said. Now you have my attention. I met her that night at an upscale hotel bar. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, swirling a glass of red wine. Her makeup was flawless, her posture elegant, but her eyes told a different story. They were empty. I slid into the seat across from her, and for a long moment, we just studied each other. Finally, she spoke. Tell me. So I did. I told her everything. She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. But when I mentioned the file with my name on it, something in her shifted. That bastard, she murmured, more to herself than to me. I leaned forward. You knew, didn't you? Her lips curled into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so cold. I knew he was a snake. I just didn't realize how deep his venom ran. I nodded, feeling something strange settle in my chest. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I wasn't alone in this. Margot took a slow sip of her wine, then set the glass down with a decisive click. So she said, tilting her head slightly. What do you want from me? I met her gaze. I want to burn him down. A pause. Then, to my surprise, she laughed. Not a soft, polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh. Oh. Adrian, she said, shaking her head. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for someone to say that. She extended a hand across the table. I didn't hesitate. I took it. And just like that, the war had begun. I barely made it through the day without breaking. It was getting harder to keep up the act, to look at Celeste and pretend I didn't know, to let her kiss me, to nod when she talked about her work. I had spent so long trying to be a good husband, a good man, trying to believe that if I just worked harder, if I just loved her more, everything would be okay. Now I knew better. Now I knew there was no fixing this. And yet, a small, pathetic part of me still wanted her to stop, to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth, to say she was sorry, even though I knew she wouldn't, even though I knew she never would. Nathan handed me the address over a cheap diner table, his fingers drumming restlessly against the cracked Formica surface. The shipment is happening tonight, he said. You really want to do this? I nodded. Yeah. Nathan studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. What are you hoping to get out of this, Adrian? I exhaled, staring at the coffee in my hands. That was the thing, I didn't know. I wasn't looking for some grand victory. I wasn't even sure I wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth. Not the half-truths Celeste had been feeding me. Not the lies I had been telling myself. The real truth. The kind that left no room for doubt. And if it destroyed everything, then maybe it needed to be destroyed. That night, Celeste left before me. She kissed me on her way out, soft and lingering, like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't spent the last few months tearing me apart piece by piece. I let her go. Then I grabbed my keys and followed. The warehouse was exactly what I expected. Cold, industrial, all steel beams and concrete floors. The kind of place where things were meant to disappear. I kept low, moving through the shadows, every muscle in my body coiled tight. I wasn't scared. I was just exhausted. Exhausted in a way I had never been before. It didn't even feel real anymore, this whole situation. It was like I had stepped out of my own life and was watching someone else live it. I had never been the kind of man who looked for fights. I had spent my life making things, creating beauty out of heat and pressure. But this wasn't about creating anything. This was about stopping something before it destroyed me completely. I slipped inside, the stale air thick with the scent of oil and dust. Rows of wooden crates lined the space, each one marked with coded numbers. And then I saw it. My name, right there, printed in black ink on the side of a crate, like I was nothing more than inventory. I swallowed hard and reached for the crowbar, jamming it into the wood. The crate groaned as I pried it open, and then, there it was, one of my pieces. A sculpture I had spent weeks perfecting. One that had meant something to me, once. Now it was just stolen property. Something in my chest clenched so tightly I thought I might break apart. And then, voices. I barely had time to slip into the shadows before they walked in. Julian, Celeste, and two security guys, their movements stiff and professional, the kind of men who didn't ask questions. Julian was smiling, relaxed, like he owned the whole damn world. He gestured toward the crates. Make sure these get loaded up. No delays. One of the security guys nodded. We've already arranged transport. No paper trail, no loose ends. Julian smirked. Perfect. And then Celeste. Celeste, standing just a little too close to him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. And then, what about Adrian? I barely breathed. Julian chuckled, shaking his head. What about him? Celeste hesitated, just for a second. Then, quietly, he doesn't deserve this. Julian sighed, almost amused. Oh, come on, Celeste. Don't tell me you're getting sentimental. She looked away, and that was when I knew. She had never planned on telling me the truth. Maybe a part of her did feel guilty. Maybe she even hated herself for what she had done. But it didn't matter. Because when the moment had come to choose, she had still chosen him. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists. And then I stepped forward. Celeste saw me first. Her eyes went wide, her breath catching in her throat. Julian, on the other hand, just raised an eyebrow. Well, he said, this is a surprise. I tossed the crowbar onto the nearest crate, the clang echoing through the warehouse. Cut the bullshit. Julian smiled, like this was all a game to him. But Celeste looked like she was about to be sick. Adrian, she started, but I shook my head. No, my voice was quiet. Steady. You don't get to talk. Her mouth snapped shut. Julian exhaled, rubbing his jaw. All right, let's just get to the point. What exactly do you think you're doing here? I pulled out my phone and hit play. His own voice filled the air. The buyers expect exclusivity. And once these pieces disappear into private collections, no one will ever question their origin. Silence. A thick, heavy silence. Then, Julian laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Adrian," he said, shaking his head. "You think a little recording is enough to stop me?" I smiled. Then I hit send. And just like that, the file was gone. Sent to Nathan. Sent to Margot. Sent to multiple news outlets, waiting for the right moment to go live. Julian's face changed. For the first time, the arrogance cracked, and something else bled through. Panic. Pure, unfiltered panic. He lunged toward me, rage twisting his face. But I was already walking away. Celeste didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at me like she didn't even recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe, after everything, I didn't recognize myself either. I didn't go home that night. I didn't even know if I had a home anymore. Instead, I found myself sitting in my car, parked on some empty street, staring at nothing. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I had won, but I had lost something, too. Something I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling shakily. And then, for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not for her, not for Julian, but for the man I used to be. For everything he had believed in. For everything he had lost. I didn't know how long I sat in that car. At some point, the sky started to lighten, the deep black of night bleeding into shades of gray. The city began to wake up around me, cars moving, people starting their days, oblivious to the fact that my life had just collapsed in on itself. I should have felt something. Relief. Satisfaction. Vindication. But all I felt was empty. The recording was out. The truth was no longer mine to carry alone. By now, Nathan and Margot would be pulling the right strings, making sure Julian's empire crumbled beneath him. And Celeste. I didn't know where she was. Didn't know if she had stayed at the warehouse after I left or if she had run straight to Julian, trying to salvage whatever was left. I didn't care. At least, that's what I told myself. I leaned my head back against the seat, staring at the cracked ceiling of my car, and exhaled shakily. What now? What the hell was I supposed to do now? I went home. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to go. The house felt different when I stepped inside. Colder. Hollow. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The shoes by the door, the half-empty wine glass on the counter, the blanket Celeste always curled up and draped over the couch. Like none of this had happened. Like my life hadn't just been ripped apart at the seams. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the silence pressing in around me. Then I moved. One step at a time, I walked through the house, through the space that had once felt like ours, the space where we had built a life together, the space where she had lied to me, betrayed me, used me. I should have been angry, but there was nothing left inside me to burn. I moved on autopilot, heading to the bedroom. The closet was still full of her things. Her perfume still lingered in the air. I reached up and pulled her favorite dress off the hanger, ran my fingers over the fabric. Then I tossed it onto the bed and grabbed the next one. And the next. And the next. By the time I was done, every single piece of her was in a pile on the floor. And I just stood there, staring at it, my breath uneven. I had spent so long trying to understand why, trying to make sense of how she could do this to me. But there was no reason good enough. No explanation that would undo what had been done. So I turned away, walked downstairs, grabbed a trash bag, and started erasing her from my life. I was halfway through cleaning out the kitchen when I heard the door open. My whole body locked up. I turned slowly. Celeste stood in the doorway, looking exhausted. Her hair was a mess, her clothes slightly wrinkled like she hadn't slept. She met my eyes, hesitated. Then, softly, "Adrian." I said nothing. She took a step inside, then stopped when she saw the trash bags, the half-packed boxes. A sharp inhale. Her voice caught. "You're really doing this?" I nodded once. Yeah. Something flickered in her eyes. Pain? Regret? I didn't care. She swallowed, looking down. I don't know what to say. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. That's a first. She flinched. Good. For a long moment, she didn't move. Just stood there, like she was waiting for me to tell her what to do, what to say. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Finally, she exhaled shakily and took another step forward. "I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my jaw. "You don't get to say that." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't try to explain herself. And that was almost worse, because it meant she had already accepted this, accepted that we were done. She swallowed hard. I'll get my things. I nodded, stepping aside. And just like that, it was over. I sat on the couch after she left, staring at the empty space where she had stood just minutes ago. The house felt quieter now. Too quiet. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the sound of my own breathing, the faint hum of the fridge, the distant noise of the city outside. Then, finally, I picked up my phone and called Nathan. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," he said, before I could even speak. I closed my eyes. Yeah. The story broke this morning. Julian's finished. A long silence stretched between us. I should have felt something, but all I felt was tired. Nathan must have sensed it because his voice softened. "What do you need, man?" I exhaled. "I don't know." Another pause. Then, "You need to get out of that house." I let out a breathy laugh, rubbing a hand down my face. "Yeah, come over," he said. "Crash on my couch for a few days. We'll figure it out." I hesitated. Then, finally, "Yeah, okay." I hung up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door without looking back. Nathan was waiting for me when I got there, 2 beers already on the table. I sank onto his couch, grabbing one, and took a long, slow sip. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, "So what now?" he asked. I exhaled, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know." And for the first time in my life, that didn't terrify me. Nathan let me stay as long as I needed. At first, I told myself it would only be a few days. But days turned into weeks. Time blurred. I existed, but I wasn't really living. I slept too much or not at all. I drank more than I should. I ignored messages, calls, anything that required effort. I told myself I needed time, that healing wasn't supposed to be rushed. But the truth? I was scared. Scared to go back to my house. Scared to walk into my studio. Scared to face whatever came next because, for the first time in my life, I had no idea what that was supposed to be. And then one morning, Nathan walked into the living room, tossed a cup of coffee at me, and sat down across from me with a look that meant he wasn't letting me off easy. "You can't keep doing this," he said. I didn't answer, just stared at the steam rising from the cup. Nathan sighed. "Adrian, you need to do something. Anything." I let out a dry laugh. "Like what?" He leaned forward. "You're still an artist, aren't you?" I flinched. I hadn't touched glass since that night. Since I walked out of that warehouse and left everything behind. My hands ached for it. But the thought of stepping back into that space, of creating again, I didn't know if I could. Nathan studied me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You don't have to know what comes next. You just have to move. Do something. Otherwise, this whole mess, it's going to swallow you whole." I swallowed hard. He was right. I just didn't know if I was ready. It took me another 3 days to gather the courage to go back. The studio smelled the same as I left it. Glass, dust, and something burnt lingering in the air. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The tools, the unfinished projects, the reminders of a life that no longer felt like mine. I stood in the doorway, my hands curling into fists, and then I forced myself to move. Step by step, I walked inside, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I ran my fingers over my work table, picked up a tool, felt the weight of it in my hand. It felt familiar, like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. I took a breath, then another. Then I turned on the furnace. And just like that, the fire came back to life. It didn't come easy. The first few days, I barely created anything at all. I just stood there, watching the flames, watching the molten glass twist and bend, waiting for something inside me to wake up. At first, everything I made was wrong. The shapes were off. The balance was missing. But I didn't stop. I worked late into the nights, letting my frustration bleed into the glass, letting my hands relearn what they had forgotten. And then, one day, I stopped thinking, stopped trying, and something clicked. I lost track of time. Hours blurred together. My hands moved on instinct. The glass took shape, raw and jagged, filled with cracks that made it imperfect, made it real. I stepped back when it was finished, my breath uneven. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way my old work had been, but it was honest. It was me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than empty. Months later, when the gallery exhibit finally opened, I almost didn't go. Nathan had to practically drag me there, saying something about how I needed to see what I had created. I stood at the back of the room, watching as people moved through the space, stopping in front of each piece. They ran their hands over the cracks, the edges that weren't smooth, the jagged imperfections that made them whole. I had named the series Fragments. Everyone had their own interpretation of what it meant. But to me, it was a story. The story of a man who shattered and somehow managed to put himself back together, piece by broken piece. Halfway through the night, I felt a presence beside me. "You could at least pretend to enjoy yourself," a familiar voice said. I turned. Margot Mercer stood there, dressed in black, holding a glass of wine like she belonged in every high-class event ever created. I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you here." She smirked. "I had to see how you spent all that rage." I huffed out a quiet laugh. "And?" Margot looked around the room, then back at me. "It's raw," she said finally. "It's not easy to look at." I nodded. "Good." A pause. Then, she clinked her glass against mine. "You survived." I exhaled. "Yeah, I did." Later that night, when the gallery had emptied and the city had quieted, I found myself alone. I walked through the exhibit one last time, trailing my fingers over the glass, over the cracks. They were flawed, but they were whole, just like me. I let out a slow breath and finally, felt at peace.